Hello everyone. It's a very blustery day today, so we are recording inside after a very windy and stormy weekend. I want to share two sets of poems with you today. One is from the anthology by A. Milne, When We Were Very Young, and then some of the poems by T.S. Eliot about cats. Since we're starting with the A. Milne, who of course has a very close relationship with Winnie the Pooh, we thought we would bring our two teddies along, Debbie's and mine, to sit alongside me as we read some of the poetry from A. Milne. We're going to start with the poem called Happiness. John had great big waterproof boots on. John had a great big waterproof hat. John had a great big waterproof mackintosh. And that, said John, is that. And now the christening. What shall I call my dear little dormouse? His eyes are small, but his tail is enormous. I sometimes call him Terrible John, 'cause his tail goes on and on and on. And I sometimes call him Terrible Jack, 'cause his tail goes on to the end of his back. And I sometimes call him Terrible James, 'cause he says he likes me calling him names. But I think I shall call him Jim, 'cause I am so fond of him. Now, the third poem is quite unusual. It's a pastoral poem, a poem really for adults as much as for children. It's about cows in the early spring air walking through a wood. And it's called The Invaders. In careless patches through the wood, the clumps of yellow primrose stood, and sheets of white anemones, like driven snow against the trees, had covered up the violet, yet left the bluebell bluer yet. Along the narrow carpet ride, with primroses on either side, between their shadows and the sun, the cows came slowly, one by one, breathing the early morning air and leaving it still sweeter there. And one by one, intent upon their purposes, they followed on in ordered silence and were gone. But all the little wood was still, as if it waited so, until some blackbird on an outpost yew, watching the slow procession through, lifted his yellow beak at last to whistle that the line had passed. Then all the wood began to sing its morning anthem to the spring. And now I'm going to read one of the most famous. It is the poem with the iconic picture, illustration drawn by E.H. Shepard, of the little boy sitting halfway up the stairs with a teddy bear at the top, no doubt Winnie the Pooh. And it's simply called Halfway Down. Halfway down the stairs is a stair where I sit. There isn't any other stair quite like it. I'm not at the bottom, I'm not at the top. So this is a stair where I always stop. Halfway up the stairs isn't up and isn't down. It isn't in the nursery, it isn't in the town. And all sorts of funny thoughts run round my head. It isn't really anywhere. It's somewhere else instead. And now here's another for the adults. It's one of my favourite. It's called The Alchemist. There lives an old man at the top of the street, and the end of his beard reaches down to his feet. And he's just the one person I'm longing to meet. I think that he sounds so exciting, for he talks all the day to his tortoiseshell cat. And he asks about this and explains about that. And at night he puts on a big wide awake hat and sits in his writing room writing. He has worked all his life and he's terribly old at a wonderful spell which says, "Lo and behold, your nursery fender is gold." And it's gold. Or the tongs, or the rods for the curtain. But somehow he hasn't got hold of it quite. Or the liquid you pour on it first isn't right. So that's why he works at it night after night, till he knows he can do it for certain. And now, another famous one. It's called The King's Breakfast. The king asked the queen, and the queen asked a dairymaid, "Could we have some butter for the royal slice of bread?" The queen asked the dairymaid said, "Certainly, I'll go and tell the cow now, before she goes to bed." The dairymaid, she curtsied, and went and told the Alderney, "Don't forget the butter for the royal slice of bread." The Alderney said sleepily, "You'd better tell His Majesty that many people nowadays like marmalade instead." The dairymaid said, "Oh, fancy," and went to Her Majesty. She curtsied to the Queen and she turned a little red. "Excuse me, Your Majesty, for taking of the liberty, but marmalade is tasty if it's very thickly spread." The Queen said, "Ew," and went to His Majesty. "Talking of the butter for the royal slice of bread, many people nowadays think marmalade is nicer. Would you like to try a little marmalade instead?" The King said, "Bother." And then he said, "Oh, dearie me." The King sobbed, "Oh, dearie me," and went back to bed. "Nobody," he said, "could call me a fussy man. I only want a little bit of butter to me bread." The Queen said, "There, there," and went to the dairymaid. The dairymaid said, "Oh, there, there," and went to the shed. The cow said, "Oh, there, there, I didn't really mean it. Here's milk for his porringer and butter for his bread." The Queen took the butter and brought it to His Majesty. The King said, "Butter, eh?" and bounced out of bed. "Nobody," he said, as he kissed her tenderly. "Nobody," he said, as he slid down the banisters. "Nobody, my darling, could call me a fussy man. I only want a little bit of butter to my bread." Right, and now we come to the final one. of the A.A. Milne anthology, and it's one of the only ones in the anthology which is set to music. The Changing Guard at Buckingham Palace is one of them, but this one is called Vespers. It's a little boy saying his prayers, kneeling by his bed. I'll sing some of it and read some of it. Little boy kneels at the foot of the bed, droops on his little hands, little gold head. Hush, hush, whisper who dares, Christopher Robin is saying his prayers. God bless Mummy, I know that's right. And wasn't it fun in the bath tonight? The cold so cold and the hot so hot. Oh, God bless Daddy, I quite forgot. If I open my fingers a little bit more, I can see Nanny's dressing gown on the door. It's a beautiful blue, but it hasn't a hood. Oh, God bless Nanny and make her good. Mine has a hood, and I lie in bed and pull the hood right over my head. And I shut my eyes and I curl up small, and nobody knows that I'm there at all. Thank you, God, for a lovely day. And what was the other I had to say? I said, bless Daddy, so what can it be? Oh, now I remember it. God bless me. Little boy kneels at the foot of the bed, droops on his little hands, little gold head. Hush, hush, whisper who dares. Christopher Robin is saying his prayers. So we say goodbye to A.A. Milne now, and I think we should also say goodbye to the Teddies. Goodbye. And we now rest them down here. Change poet. If I can find my props. Here we are. Put that there. Put that there for later. And these next three poems, the three poems I'm doing, are from T.S. Eliot's wonderful anthology, Cats. Old Possum's book of practical cats, to be precise. And of course, most of them have been made famous by the fabulous show by Andrew Lloyd Webber, by the same musical by the same name, Cats. But I think the words are wonderful by themselves as well. So I'm not going to sing these, I'm going to speak them. And the first is the introduction. That's called The Naming of Cats. The naming of cats is a difficult matter. It isn't just one of your holiday games. You may think at first I'm as mad as a hatter when I tell you a cat must have 3 different names. First of all, there's a name that the family used daily, such as Peter, Augustus, Alonzo, or James, such as Victor or Jonathan, George, Bill Bailey, all of them sensible everyday names. There are fancier names if you think they sound sweeter, some for the gentlemen and some for the dames, such as Plato, Admetus, Electra, Demeter, all of them sensible everyday names. But a cat needs a name that's particular, a name that's peculiar and more dignified. Else how could he keep up his tail perpendicular, or spread out his whiskers, or cherish his pride? Of names of this type, I can give you a quorum, such as Monkscrap, Quaxo, Coricopat, such as Bombalurina, or Elso, Jellylorum, names that never belong to more than one cat. But above and beyond, there's one name left over. And this is the name that you never will guess. The name that no human research can discover, but the cat himself knows and will never confess. When you notice a cat in profound meditation, the reason, I tell you, is always the same. The cat is engaged in a rapt contemplation of the thought, of the thought, of the thought of his name, his ineffable, effable, and ineffable, deep and inscrutable, singular nay. Right, and now let's introduce one of the cats. This is called Gus. Gus, put the ribbon in, Gus the theatre cat. Gus is a cat at the theatre door. His name, as I ought to have told you before, is really Asparagus. But that's such a fuss to pronounce, we usually call him just Gus. His coat's very shabby, he's thin as a rake, and he suffers from palsy, which makes his paw shake. He was in his time quite the smartest of cats, though no longer a terror to mice and to rats. For he isn't the cat that he was in his prime, though his name was quite famous, he says, in its time. And whenever he joins his friends at their club, which takes place at the back of the neighbouring pub, he loves to regale them, if someone else pays, with anecdotes drawn from his palmiest days. For he once was a star of the highest degree, he has acted with Irving, acted with Tree, and he loves to relate his success on the halls, where the gallery once gave him 7 catcalls. But his grandest creation, as he loves to tell, was a fire for fiddle, the fiend of the fell. I have played, so he says, every possible part, and I once knew 70 speeches by heart. I'd extemporize backchat, I knew how to gag, and I knew how to let the cat out of the bag. I knew how to act with my back and my tail, with an hour of rehearsal I never could fail. I'd a voice that would soften the hardest of hearts, whether I took the lead or in character parts. I have sat by the bedside of poor little Nell. When the curfew was rung, I swung on the bell. In the pantomime season, I never fell flat, and I once understudied Dick Whittington's cat. But my grandest creation, as history will tell, was "O fire for fiddle, the fiend of the fell." And if someone will give him a toothful of gin, he'll tell how he once played a part in East Lynne. In a Shakespeare performance, he once walked on pat when some actor suggested the need for a cat. He once played a tiger, could do it again, which an Indian colonel pursued down a drain. And he still thinks he can, much better than most, produce blood-curdling noises to bring on the ghost. And he once crossed the stage on a telegraph wire to rescue a child when a house was on fire. And he'll say, well, these kittens, they do not get trained as we did in the days when Victoria reigned. They do not get drilled in a regular troop, and they think it is smart just to jump through a hoop. And he'll say, as he scratches himself with his claws, well, the theatre's certainly not what it was. These modern productions are all very well, but there's nothing to equal, from what I hear tell, that moment of mystery when I made history. As Fire fra fiddle, the fiend of the fell. Well, that is Gus. And now we move on to the final performance. And this is actually the final poem in the anthology of T.S. Eliot's. And it doesn't appear in the musical. In fact, it didn't appear in the original anthology. It was added as an afterthought by T.S. Eliot. But I think I have to say that this particular cat is my favourite. And for this, you need to know that T.S. Eliot's editors were Faber and Faber. In fact, he worked for them for a time as an editor himself. And the offices of Faber and Faber were then, and indeed still are, on the corner of Russell Square, in a very fine building. Russell Square being in the part of London called Bloomsbury, the place famous for literati. And that's why in this poem we hear about this particular cat looking after the door in a Bloomsbury Square. So here we are, introducing Cat Morgan. I once was a pirate, what sailed the high seas, but now I'm retired as a commissionaire. And that's where you find me, a-taking me ease and a-keeping the door in a Bloomsbury Square. I'm partial to partridges, likewise to grouse, and I fancy that Devonshire cream in a bowl. But I'm always content with a drink on the house and a little cold fish when I done my patrol. I ain't got much polish, me manners is gruff, but I've got a good coat and I keep myself smart. And everyone says, and I guess that's enough, you can't but like Morgan, he's got a good heart. I got knocked about on the Barbary coast. My voice, it ain't no such mellifluous organ. But yet I can state, and I'm not one to boast, some of the girls is dead keen on old Morgan. So if you have business with Faber, or Faber, I'll give you this tip, and it's worth a lot more. You will save yourself time and you'll spare yourself labour if just you make friends with the cat at the door. Morgan. And there we are. Cheerio, everyone.